Hello and welcome to the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. My name is Claudia Rizzini. I'm the Executive Director of the Fellowship Program. The Institute is one of the world's leading centers for interdisciplinary exploration. We bring students, scholars, artists, and practitioners together to pursue curiosity-driven research, expand human understanding, and grapple with questions that demand insight from across disciplines. You can participate in this vibrant community by attending public programs such as this one, visiting virtual exhibitions, or pursuing the special collection held at the Schlesinger Library. To learn more, you can visit radcliffe.harvard.edu and sign up to receive more information on news and events. We'll bring the program with a presentation by Tonya M. Foster. After the presentation, the speaker will respond to questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A feature on Zoom to submit your questions at any time throughout the program. We ask that you keep your questions brief to allow us to address as many as possible in the time that we have together. It is my pleasure to introduce this year's Lisa Goldberg Fellow, Tonya Foster. Professor Foster is the George and Judy Marcus Endowed Chair in Poetry at San Francisco State University. Her writing and research center around the ideas of place and emplacement, and on intersections between the visual and the written, and on mapping the 20th and 21st century African Americans. Professor Foster is the author of the poetry collection A Swarm of Bees in High Court and the bilingual poetry chapbook La Grammaire des Eaux. She is the co-editor of the essay collection Third Mind, Creative Writing Through the Visual Arts, and she's one of the poetry editors at Fence magazine. Upcoming projects include the poetry collection Thingification, forthcoming from the Ugly Duckling Press, and a poetry collection A History of the Beach, AHotB, which will explore Fanny Lou Hamer reflection that a Black woman's body is never hers alone. The poems will consider what Hamer's statement means for Black women's lives in the 20th and 21st centuries, by drawing on newspaper records of assaults and trial between the 1966 and 2019, and through newspapers and women's personal accounts of significant political and cultural events. Professor Foster is also working on Money Talk, a multimedia, multi-genre project that studies issues of race, paranoia, surveillance, and aesthetics. During her year at Radcliffe, Professor Foster is delving into these two projects that coincides with their interest with African American modes of survival that are improvised and passed on through time. Throughout her career, Professor Foster's scholarly and creative works have been supported by grants from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Center for the Humanities at the Graduate Center CUNY. She is the recipient of honors and residencies from Headland Center of the Arts, McDowell, New York Foundation for the Arts, among others. Professor Foster's earned her PhD in English, focusing in African American literature from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and her MFA in creative writing at the University of Houston. And now it is my pleasure to give the virtual floor to Tonya Foster.
Claudia, thank you for that introduction and for your guidance and support throughout this fellowship year. Thank you to the Radcliffe Institute team, including Sharon and Rebecca, Dean Brown, Nora, Jessica, for your responsiveness and help navigating things in kind of trying times. And sincere thanks to the Institute for these tremendous gifts of time, research support and of access to rich, vibrant, and diverse community of scholars, scientists, writers, artists, practitioners, research assistants. And thank you to the sponsors of the Goldberg Fellowship, which I'm really honored to hold. You know, when I first learned that I had received an Institute Fellowship, that I'd received the Lisa Goldberg Fellowship, specifically, I told a very dear poet friend, Erica Hunt, who was for years the head of a nonprofit organization. She spoke glowingly of Lisa Goldberg and of Goldberg's work. I wish that I had known her. I am honored to be a beneficiary of her legacy, and I'd like to begin this talk by citing something she said that aligns with some of the goals I have for my own writing and teaching and creative practice in the world. Above all, our goal is to be where others aren't, where we can bring our unique expertise and our passion to bear, where we can find partners to join us and leverage our own investment. Our hope always is that what we do will matter, will make a difference. So I'll proceed with a variant on an artist talk. Before I begin, I'd like to offer the trigger warning for those who are listening that throughout the talk, there will be some cussing, use of vulgar, profane terms. And I'm sometimes, as poet Simone White has said of herself, I'm a bit of a pearl clutcher. So it's a little discomforting at times to use these terms, but they seem relevant to what I'm thinking about and how I'm thinking about things. Um, Understand that there will also be descriptions of violence, um, but neither language nor the descriptions are meant as merely gratuitous references. First quote: "There's garbage on the street that's telling you you ain't shit, and you almost believe it." That's from Amiri Baraka's Something in the Way of Things in Town. From eating shit to talking shit to being the shit despite. If this piece were titled, it might be called A Poetics of Discomfort and Illegibility. Shit, talking, eating, being the provisional title of my dissertation, I should say, was Talking Shit, A Poetics of Discomfort in Black Expressive Culture. Now, what is it to say that term so many times within the first few sentences of this text, of this talk? To say that in this virtual space, where is this speaker positioning herself and in what relation to the context in which the speech is occurring? In these times of virtual life and community, and where and who are the audiences? The phrase talking shit had come up for me as a perspective, partially tongue in cheek, partially insistent tongue wagging dissertation title that was wisely nixed by my dissertation advisor, Dr. Robert Reed Farr. Having finished the dissertation, the phrase remains in my frame of reference and in my thinking as a kind of touchstone for what the dissertation's work might yet become and what my creative work points to. It's a partial rejection of complete submission to the propriety of academic language, mores, and modes, which formally restrict the registers of address and thoughtful study. It may also remain as the echo of the voice of a former lover and poet who on our first date proclaimed that I was talking shit. And I wasn't sure how to take that, as complaint or compliment or moment of revulsion or fascination. With whom am I talking? And can I bring my mother are two questions central to my creative and scholarly practices. What are the registers of address and meaning that can be brought to bear person to person in the field of the poem, in the landscape of the book, in the space of the essay, lyric, personal, or critical, in the theoretical field of writing, creative and critical, as speech, in the time and attenuation of the performance, including the phrase talking doo-doo in the title of my dissertation, was my way of insisting on the ever presence in my thinking, making, and being of subjugated or disavowed humanisms. What Candace Chu in The Difference Aesthetic Makes rightly refers to as illiberal humanisms, those registers of interpretive meaning making and authority which exist and thrive outside the parameters of academic and standardized representations of the worthy subject, the subject that speaks, the subject of speech, as well as the written and spoken forms of speech. Now, in person, of course, I do not cuss in front of or in proximity to my mother. Hi, mama. Not in front of my mother, nor my father, nor my aunts, nor my uncles. We are, after all, Southern going back to well before the US Civil War. The 1880 census records list at least 5 generations of my maternal grandmother's father's clan living in Belle Alliance, Louisiana, on land deeded to each successive generation of kin. My maternal grandfather's maternal and paternal clans likewise have long Louisiana lineages. My father's maternal clan, Louisiana and Ethiopian, perhaps. Kinship, like Southernness, carries with it certain codes and proprieties, and sometimes properties, genetic and geographic. The codes of engagement and belonging vary according to both fixed and transitory fields. On occasion, my Southern family may taunt me with Yankee if I have a non Orleans pronunciation, such as, I don't know, calling mayonnaise mayonnaise or neutral grounds a median, all because of a birth and 3-month beginning in Bloomington, Illinois, all because of inflection, all because the tongue may be trained by the where and by the myriad historical and cultural contexts of that where. Of course, I have never and would never call them Confederates. There are limits imposed by the training. Traditions of talking shit like any mode have long operated according to relation, social, cultural, and power relations, age, kinship, familial, oppositional relations factor in. Robert, my dissertation advisor, wisely directed me against titling my dissertation Talking Caca. And his advice was on the money in the literal and figurative sense. He had a clear understanding of market logics, which dictate strict compartmentalization in order to better brand and market ideas, creative practices, and inventions, an idea of person and people. One of the things that Robert pointed out is that when you look up Tanya Foster, what will come up is talking shit. The internet is the current king of associative mixing, and Twitter is, particularly since 2016, a platform for the voice of national and state authority and policy. I entitled the dissertation Difficult Subjects Scatting and Scattered, A Poetics of Dissolution in Black Expressive Culture. Though I hadn't originally thought of or heard talking crapola as confrontational, only as funny, ha ha funny, like an 11-year-old boy or girl's fascination with bodily functions, and odd funny in its myriad implications for speech or for the speaker as shit or as the shit. I must admit that it is difficult for me to repeat the phrase in front of an audience, virtual or not, or in front of y'all, as might be more usefully appropriate. That difficulty may be fecund space in which to consider difficulty in the difficulty of shit, of waste or excess, contradiction contained and not. Now, there's also something about my experience in academia that for me is addressed by this term. There was a point of contention for me about the project of getting a PhD while Black, while woman, while over 35, while childless, while husbandless, while unknown, while unmoneyed, while working class, while not owning property other than thousands of books, while on what may be read by some as the path of supreme invisibility. I looked to my very first class at the CUNY Grad Center with art historian and literary critic Marianne Cause, also a Southerner, as a particularly revealing moment for me. In the first class for that course, Professor Cause invited students to give brief introductions about themselves and their interests in the course. The first two young white male students spoke of their love of Kant, or was it Wittgenstein? Certainly not John Berger. Despite how different the figures are, I can't recall clearly which. What I do recall is that I perhaps smiled too broadly as they spoke. Perhaps my own discomfort with the sense that my own interests were more pedestrian. I wanted to read and think about poetry. I wanted to look at and think about art. I know that I thought, you must be kidding. While I had read a bit of Kant and a few excerpts of Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations, and it seems an academically legitimizing move to assert this, love seemed and still seems a peculiar term to employ in the description of one's relationship to works by those authors within the academy. What is meant by love here? It seemed a certain kind of talking shit that could be read as an assertion of belonging in the space of the classroom, in the space of the academic. The price of admission seemed to necessitate a rejection of the speech and languages and, yes, kinships that signaled membership in other communities. The young men's intros seemed to me to be about power and authority, and about proximity to power and authority, and about knowing the crushing languages of power. It seems the language and nature of love in the academy are limited and limiting. But certain kinds of shit talking can lay claim to power, can lay claim to space. When Professor Caw's question reached me, I began, I don't know. And I wanted to hold some space and have some time in this arena of not knowing and of being unknown to myself. Years before that class, while a student in an MFA program, it had occurred to me that there was no space in the parameters of that program and the academy as I understood it then for the forms and ways of knowing that I'd learned growing up in a working class Black family in New Orleans, in my mother's house, in my parents' Barbara and Spencer's home, under the tutelage of grandmas Cadella and Dorothy, under the guidance of my Belle, of Miss Annie, of Aunt Renee, of Aunt Della, of Aunt Gwen, of cousin Bootsy. In those spaces, I understood that we can make a space, spaces for self and for a community of selves, can make a space out of no place, the no place of the perceived dystopia through our language. And I didn't want to reject the languages of home while inside the academic space where I traveled lonely and bemused, which demanded and in some ways continues to demand my invisibility. While still a student, I had also begun doing research for the creative project, A History of the Bitch. Again, looking for those registers in which being and the conditions of one's life, observed and experienced, are non academically theorized, where there is lived experience that articulates how what doesn't kill you may maim you, and insists on the importance of laughing to keep from dying. Perhaps there is a measure of anger in my attention to talking shit. Of course, I would like to say, but I'm not angry. I would like to say I am chill, but given the nature of things and the level of the state, in the time of the day to day, I'm not entirely convinced that such a proclamation isn't another form of talking shit. It's a partial pushback against being stereotyped and thereby disappeared as the angry Black woman. I'm uncertain that such a denial of anger isn't about avoiding the truth of what Brittany Cooper in Eloquent Rage says about the riskiness of rage, that it might cost more than I can bear. So maybe talking shit is my meager attempt to clap back on the shit that's meant to wear one down to nothing. I know that my interest in the phrase doesn't begin and end in the purely reactive posture. So, talking shit is suggestive for a myriad of reasons. The phrase points in multiple directions, characterizing the content of what might be said as bravura or nonsense, as the best or the worst, as potentially waste, as potentially excess, as potentially the necessarily exact. It's the shit. Alternately, the phrase might characterize a position for the speaker on a stoop or on a porch or on a corner, spaces not held within the academy as significant locations for the production and articulation of knowledge, and yet they are. The phrase points to those illegitimate spaces as locales of keen study, incisive critique, and of self invention and reclamation. Now, these days, or more recently, the phrase might characterize a position for the speaker beside the water cooler or on the Twitter page, or recently in the White House. Talking positions the speaker within complex community while it positions the speech act in which to which it refers within an African American tradition of speech acts and texts that are generated in dialogue and are constructed of dialogue, and as such generate a continuum, and this is a quote from Lawton, across semantic and pragmatic and aesthetic, and this is my addition, and aesthetic and sonic domains, as well as across temporal and geographic domains. Sonically, the phrase talking shit signifies the etymological juncture between scatting, a form of talking or singing shit, scattering, and the scatological. For me, the phrase talking is also meant to mark the thought experiment both as and at a crossroads where the vernacular and scholarly dance and intersect. Now, not long ago, there's this wonderful thing on YouTube. It's called Learning English from Emma. I had done this search, and in two YouTube videos from the series host and teacher Emma schools online English learners on the usefulness of the term shit. In her blue blazer and reassuring tone, as she introduces the first lesson on shit and its uses, Emma is unable to completely suppress a laugh as she tries to spit shine the vulgar expression, tries to politely domesticate the impolite with classroom decorum. something about talking about shit as word, as expression, even in the context of a virtual schoolroom and grammar lesson, seems an attempt to hold a river with a spoon. It is an example of talking shit as mode. Now, I came across Emma's videos in the course of doing a search. But now, talking shit, I propose that talking shit positions the speech act and the speaker within a raced discourse. Um, and at some later point, I'm happy to go into how I arrive at that place in thinking about it. Um, but if we think of proximity to waste and those kinds of things, who's positioned where? The but that is the by. And what of a body and its material domains? Past moments recorded. Dorothy Wang writes in a brilliant introduction to an anthology of Black British poetry that consumers in cosmopolitan first world cities drink their cocoa, tea, rum, eat their pastries and sweets, smoke their cigars, accessorize with gold and diamonds. But the true cost of those frivolous luxuries was paid for by blood. Um, and they remind us, he cites Chris Manjapra, cites a really graphic example of the brutality of British plantation slavery and how, while Britons back home were drinking and eating delightful fluids and solids, um, this was happening. Thomas Thistlewood, a British slave owner in Jamaica in the mid 1700s, in his July 23rd, 1756 diary entry, described punishing a slave in the following manner: gave him a moderate whipping, pickled him well, made Hector shit in his mouth, immediately put a gag in whilst his mouth was full, and made him wear it. We may speak metaphorically or abstractly of slaves and people of color having no voice, but the specificity and concreteness of this act, recounted by the perpetrator in a matter of fact tone, speaks volumes about the literal acts of silencing that took place and point to the acts of silencing. Um, this stuck with me because one of the things that happened in 2005 when I returned to New Orleans, I learned in 2005 after Katrina, spoke to relatives who'd been in the Superdome just after Katrina, and they talked about the backed up and overflowing toilets and the horrible smell of human waste and rot, how it contributed to a sense of utter despair. Now, according to John Berger, in A Load of Shit, Mulan Kundera dismisses the idea of God because, according to him, no God would have designed a life in which shitting was necessary. There is perhaps a bit of the moral elitist in this idea, inasmuch as it transforms a natural repugnance into a moral shock. Again, to Berger, shit is what is left behind, undifferentiated, the waste from energy received and burnt up. The energy has myriad forms, but for us humans, with our human shit, all energy is partly verbal, partly sonic, it's partly performative rather than a definitive space. I've been thinking about talking shit as a performative rather than definitive space. The works I'm most inspired by imagine now as a messy proposition of multiple forms floating through space and time in reckless proximity. how to experience, how to create, and how to represent on the page, in the performance, in the mind and memory, sonic and visual registers, which in turn enact dialectical encounters between different oralities and literacies and between different realities. In writing, I'm both forging and tracking a range of relationships with multiple paths, my own, my clan's, my steadfast mother's, my disappearing father's, ancestors, literary progenitors, multiple paths and possible futures of those paths. A history of the bitch comes out of reckonings, difficult and dark. The gender dismissal, which is at the heart of the term, points in my thinking and feeling again to subjugated, disavowed humanisms, which have news of how to survive and thrive anyhow. Despite statistics pointing to how health outcomes in most categories, um, despite pointing to low health outcomes in most categories, what sociologists call the suicide paradox points to the idea that Black US born women, when compared with groups of white women and men and with Black men, Black women have the lowest rates of suicide. There may be other mechanisms arrayed to take us out. However, our own hands are busy with other work. One poem from A History of the Bitch. For a time, in some places, only men could testify. Testify rooted with testes, testicles, tongue tied to crotch, talk of truth as biology. Biblical Abraham had his servant swear a solid, put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth. Biblical Israel, now if I have found favor in your sight, please put your hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me. Oaths by issue. Banker Stanley, husband of Rachel, testifies that he and his family have lived on Newton's Mill Street for 20 years. Newton's already 339 when Stanley and Rachel moved there. T is 3 years old, toddling, 1,500 miles south in a New Orleans shotgun on Melpomene Street. Nola is 251 years old then. It's 1969, year of the rooster, when Stanley and Rachel moved, begin perhaps a family in that neighborhood of homes, of expansive and expensive empty lawns the eyes yawn across. Luxuriant space. T in the tight shotgun tiny has begun to collect language. Words roll, rumble in her tender toddler's mouth, ears forming mine. Boisterous for a young one, she is loud when she laughs, when she sings, when she searches her mama, daddy, grandma, cousins' faces, searches for the train her father tucks beneath her grandparents' front room bed for safekeeping in cramped quarters. In dreams, years later, T will recall reaching into that darkness as clearly as she recollects the kitchen stove, the unseemly window fan pulling air through the narrow back lot, the orange sofa bed, the single bath. She will recall this darkness as tender as a fear she didn't know. 1969 in the Holocene. Like T, the Black Panther Party, miles from certain Newton luxuries, 3,085, miles from the New Orleans mouth of the Mississippi, 2,263, is just 3 years old. Oakland's BPP begins to feed daily little ones like T. At 3, they all remap worlds, take in words, recollate sentences meant to contain and constrain them, remarking ourselves in syllabic struts. The languages we speak us into place and roll, refuse, roll away the stones, words that hem and haw us in. 1969 in the Holocene. Say the FBI director says that without question, the greatest threat to the internal security of the country is the Black Panther Party. Who's a nation in that claim? Whose internals are breached by the feeding of children as young as ones living in Southern shotguns? Who are the invasive free radicals ravaging wholeness in the thicket of the nationhood and its hooded surveillance of love expressed by filling hungry mouths? Who that surveying and saying, years later, one who's come lately will say as she explains to him what's happened, calm down, stop crying, as though her tears were invalid testimony of what done gone down, as if her blackness were enough to let her swallow that river. Who can believe tears of a Black woman? Who can believe a Black woman's tears while carrying guns? Monkey talk comes out of an interest, that interest in the breakdown of language and in those encounters between different ways of talking and different ways of writing and different ways of being, different ways of being in the world, different beings in the world. It's conceived as a multi-genre, multimedia project. The work grew out of a request for an essay on race and representation. And in a kind of fever, I responded by writing this thing that I've called a transcription. Um, and so I'd like to share with you a reading of um, a part of a reading from that happened at Temple University, a part of a reading of one of the transcriptions.
I knew it. Such a bald-faced lie. There's no South in your talk. There's no way that you...
But I am from New.
Jeez. How much of a fool do you take me for? Quit monkeying around. I heard someone there call you Yankee.
An odd but not uncommon joke among Black Southerners who never referred to themselves or to each other as Confederates. They identify themselves with the place, but not with the place's agenda.
I heard someone there call you Yankee. How could you have lied to me? I knew that the way you talk would be a problem, but Yankee, no less? I knew it.
I wouldn't. I didn't. Look, that happens sometimes on holidays. After lots of food and talk, my relatives taunt me with Yankee because of how I talk. Despite the failure of my tongue to strictly follow certain Southern codes of speech, I am a Southerner, Carl.
Hong readily lies in order to achieve her goals. She neglects to mention that she was born in Bloomington, Illinois.
Kong lived in Bloomington for approximately 3 months. What of that time could she possibly have remembered, known? Certainly her family may have told her something about these first months, about the small family's train ride to New Orleans. Weather records for the time indicate that a major blizzard occurred right around the time of her birth. It seems to me that both sets of information would have had similar, rather fuzzy origins for her.
Despite the failure of my tongue to strictly follow certain Southern codes of speech, I am a Southerner, Carl.
Are you even Black?
Subject is articulate and soft-spoken.
What did he expect? In what place and by what means does Blackness achieve its substance?
Are you even Black?
Well, of course. Look, what do I have to do to convince you? I'm a product.
I read what you wrote. A product of the flatland of New Orleans.
New Orleans, Louisiana.
The Big
I read
Easy,
what...
the Crescent City.
I read what you wrote. A product of the flatland of New Orleans. That dike enclosed fabrication that's caught between the Mississippi River, the Gulf of Mexico, and Lake Pontchartrain. 3 tongues which dictate the wills and ways of the city.
In conversation after conversation, and in poem after poem, Kong expresses a rather deviant interest in tongues. The Bureau's psychological profile suggests that this interest is related to the subject's general paranoia about what others are saying about her and doing to her behind her back, and about who or what is keeping an eye on her. Her frequent, somewhat mystifying tendency of telling callers, "Watch your mouth," suggests an inordinate level of suspicion. Her paranoia concerns the Bureau. Her paranoia is also a reflection of repressed homoerotic tendencies.
Paranoia, a mental disorder characterized by systematized delusions and the projection of personal conflicts, which are ascribed to the supposed hostility of others, sometimes progressing to disturbances of consciousness and aggressive acts believed to be performed in self-defense or as a mission. So these two works, what follows in that piece, I actually had hoped to get us to the point of where the PhD student is talking about tongues, references to tongues and interest in beef tongues and those things. But it's about language and language breaking down and different kinds of languages creating a discourse. And I'll stop my talk there. Please, if you have any questions, thank you. I'll turn it over to Claudia.
Wow, thank you, Tonya. This was a wonderful talk. Thank you so much. And we do have questions. So let me go to the first one. Can you talk about how you decide to go with a particular form? Broadly, why poetry rather than prose? And in your poetry, how does form contribute to meaning?
Wow, that's an incredible question. I mean, I think that form is one of the ways that we mean, right? And that for me, when I'm writing, well, I was going to say when I'm writing poetry, that it's sonic. It's very grounded in what I hear. I used to joke that when I was in it, when I'm writing in a particular way, it's as if I hear some hum beyond me and I'm trying to write into that hum. But how do I decide on form? For Monkey Talk, it's important that myriad forms come together so that it's poetry, transcripts, or dialogue, and prose, that I'm interested in what the form of the dissertation communicates. What's the language that it traffics in? And so what's the conversation created when these things are brought together and not necessarily brought together in a seamless way?
That's great. We have the following question starts with brava. So lucky to have been able to be here and hear this. So grateful for the reminder about the spaces where knowledge is produced and articulated outside of academia. I wanted to ask about and around Louisiana as an oil-producing state and site of polluting plants, and the silences of the coastal communities. The cost to communities, sorry.
Right. The cost in terms of lives. I mean, I'm really the other part of this talk that I kind of didn't have enough time to get to has to do with the statistics on who's positioned near toxic waste sites, who's positioned near, who's left to defecate in the open, who has sewage that sort of isn't enclosed and treated, and that's generally those aspects of human being that we consider disposable in some way, that we as a culture consider disposable. And so I think it's our own survival depends on attending to that and changing our imagination so that not that we're imposing a narrative structure on those communities, but so that we're actually hearing what's being said, what's being spoken.
Right. The next question is, I wasn't expecting this talk to be funny, but I found myself laughing out loud so many times. How and why does Tonya deploy humor in her poetry and essays? It disarms and makes the issues that she's addressing less confrontational. Less confrontational.
Well, I laugh to keep from dying, truth be told. And it's not crying that I'm worried about, because crying can be useful, but I don't want to go out. And so I am interested in and committed to, I'm really interested in understanding Richard Pryor and other comedians like him, the kind of humor that is an expression of I'm still here.
Yeah. A member of the audience asked, can you tell us about the photo behind you?
The photo behind me, I the oldest women I knew, I asked them to lunch, and they were my two grandmothers, Miss Annie and Cousin Bootsy. And I asked them to lunch, and I recorded a conversation with them. And I would ask them about, well, what do I need to know as a woman in the world? How do I need to be? And they talked to me about so many different things. It was interesting. I made this, and I made some fettuccine alfredo and chicken, and broccoli. And I remember Miss Annie said, oh, this is so light. And I thought, it's fettuccine alfredo. It can't be light. But this was in my mother's house before Hurricane Katrina. So it had to have been like 2002, 2003. And it's right around Christmas, and they're sitting in the den. And so I had made a film and was projecting the film behind me at a reading. And Erica Kaufman snapped this picture with my camera and caught the faces you can see in the picture are my own, my grandma Cadella, and Cousin Bootsy.
Wow, thank you. The next question starts with, loved your presentation. How do you navigate resistance to your creative approach in an academic setting?
I laugh.
Yeah, that's a good question.
How do I now? I'm old. I I guess I can't not do it anyway. This is what I can do.
There you are. Can one define the moral sense of Black culture?
Ooh, no. It's various and wide. The moral sense of Black culture. And is that sense in meaning? Is that sense in the feeling of it? Or what's the question?
I don't know. I think we have to leave it there. We don't have enough information to answer. The next question is, I felt like I could hear Adrienne Kennedy's influence in the transcript dialogue clip you played for us. Am I right about that?
You are so right about that. Wow. Yes. And in fact, there is an Adrienne Kennedy festival online, Roadhouse Theater, there are 4 plays of hers that you can, if you have $60, you can buy access to those 4. I haven't watched them yet, but they're in my queue to do.
Perfect. And the follow-up to the question is, regardless, could you talk about whose work artistry is making your AHotB project possible?
Whew. Certainly Sadia Hartman's Wayward Women, and Lose Your Mother makes a lot of my work possible. I'm always inspired by, moved by Norbesi Phillip. Christina Sharp's work is making it possible. I love Alexis Pauline Gumb's work, Hortense Spillard's always. Um, I was watching the film The Rape of Reese Taylor, and thinking about, there's a moment where Miss Taylor says, I have to tell the truth. And so I think about her, I think about other women I'm reading about, assault and the civil rights movement, rape and the civil rights movement, and how Black women were pivotal in claiming ownership of their own bodies. Certainly Fanny Lou Hamer, so many women, Ida B. Wells, how the fight for social justice is also a fight for reclamation of one's own body.
Yeah. The next question is, honored to hear you, Tonya. Thank you. I'm thinking about coding, switching, and signifying, and how registers of diction are about survival and agency, as well as a kind of talking back in that Black feminist tradition. Could you talk about the interplay between your imaginative life and critical work?
I feel like they're informed by each other, that I can't. One of the things for me is that I love having books, but I can't read without writing in the margins. So for books that I love, I inevitably have 2 copies, one that's marked up and one that I can refer to or lend out if I don't want someone to see my whatever thoughts. So what I've learned is possible in scholarly and critical work, that it's also a creative practice, that it's not actually as static as one might think. Often I had colleagues in school who would mimic writers who were significantly older than they were, who were writing in that, whether it's okay, they kind of mimic writing like Derrida. I can't write like Derrida. That I hear things differently. And so my scholarly work is influenced by poetry and poets who are thinking through their form. And so I see the forms as more mobile, more flexible.
Yeah. Next question. Thank you. It was brilliant to be able to feel the language evolving itself with the different experiences and feelings of the people who use it. Yet, it never felt foreign when I heard it today at this webinar. How do you come up with the linguistic expressions, and what do you think about the words having their own lives as people use them and constantly transforming?
I think it's an amazing thing. I listen where I can. I remember being on a subway in New York and seeing Savion Glover with a small one of these mini disc recorders, Sony mini disc recorder. And I love that idea of just recording and really paying attention to what you hear. That's a way of understanding, listening closely.
Right. Each question starts with a very great appreciation of your talk. So here another one. Fascinating presentation. You've lived in so many different regions of the United States. How have the differences in languages in these different regions affected your writing and your poetry?
Well, I'm trying to get to know each place that I live. In New York, I was out, I was walking all the time, right? And so when I lived in Brooklyn, I heard one thing. When I lived in Harlem, I heard something else. How one talks in New Orleans is very different. How you walk or how you move around. And the landscape impacts, actually, it impacts how one breathes. And so it impacts how one moves. So it necessarily impacts how you speak. That's one of the things I'm learning. This is so strange and arbitrary, but I began using the word dude after moving to California. And I would catch myself saying it to friends in New York. And I thought, why am I saying dude? This has never been a part of my my language, but somehow it now is. So, vocabulary, other things. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. Thanks for this talk. How do you decide how much personal material you share?
It varies. There was a time when I would share no personal material because what I grew up, what I learned is you don't tell people your business. As I've gotten older, I've gotten to the sense of, honestly, I want to say something true, and I'm trying to understand and articulate to myself what there is. I also think that the personal is social in ways that we'd like to pretend that it's radically individual, but it isn't. And so the only way to understand the universal is through an excavation of the personal in particular.
Great. So I'll use a comment that came through to end our meeting today. It says, just a comment to say, absolutely marvelous, Tonya. Thanks so much for this presentation, your work, and you. I also want to thank the audience for the terrific questions. I hope you'll be able to join us for other Radcliffe virtual programs. You can find out about future programs and watch videos of past events at radcliffe.harvard.edu. Thank you again for joining us today and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.